In a remote corner of New York State, there was a forest that was never featured in travel guides, and about which locals preferred to stay silent. The place was shrouded in rumors, and the forest itself was known as the Killer Forest for generations. People whispered that mysterious disappearances happened here, and that the forest itself seemed to come alive to catch its victims. When a group of young people, Rachel, Dave, Mike, Sarah, and Josh, heard about this forest, they took all the stories as legends and decided to spend the weekend enjoying nature and the wild silence. They rented equipment, packed their backpacks, and set off, not believing in the old myths. At first, everything went as usual. The forest was dense, full of greenery, and only a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. The scenery was picturesque, and the group enjoyed the silence, far from the bustle of the city. Soon, they found a clearing where they decided to stop, light a fire, and set up their tent. But as night fell, something in the forest began to change. The darkness thickened faster than they expected, and with every step, the shadows grew longer and denser. At first, they didn't think much of it, but soon they began to notice strange sounds as if someone was walking behind them. But whenever they turned around, everything went silent. "Did you hear that?" Rachel asked, her voice tense. "Probably deer or some other animals," Mike replied, trying to calm her down. But after a few hours, the sounds grew louder, as if something was indeed moving in the darkness. And the steps didn't fade away. On the contrary, they seemed to be getting closer. The students assumed it might be a large animal, a bear or an elk, but then from the trees came a sound that couldn't be made by any animal. It was something else, a sinister crackling, like something massive and heavy was pushing its way through the trees. "Maybe we shouldn't have come here," Dave said, his face pale as his eyes met the same dark silhouettes among the trees. Rachel felt her heart start pounding wildly. With each step, the forest grew eerily quieter, and then they heard a scream, sharp, desperate, and it cut off so suddenly that they all frowned. See, it was Josh's scream. They all jumped to their feet, but Josh was nowhere to be seen. The only thing left behind was his flashlight, which they found a few minutes later. It was turned off, and around it were dark patches of blood. But the blood trail didn't lead to Josh. It went deeper into the forest. "What's happening?" Sarah whispered softly, but no one could answer. They all felt the cold creeping up their spines, and their hearts tightened in fear as they moved forward. Everything around them started to change. The forest grew darker, and the trees seemed to twist and write their shadows. Stretching longer, the air grew thick, as if the forest itself was alive, breathing and watching them. And then they saw it, against the backdrop of darkness. Through the trees, a silhouette emerged. It wasn't a bear, an elk, or even a large predatory bird. It was a humanoid beast, its skin covered in dark scales, and its eyes, bright yellow, glowing from within. Its body was too thin and long, with huge bear-like paws, but its claws were sharp, like knives. Rachel screamed as the creature took a step forward. It moved slowly, as if savoring their fear, watching their reactions. And when they tried to retreat, it followed them, disappearing into the darkness, leaving only the eerie glow of its eyes behind. "Run!" Mike shouted, but as soon as they started to flee, the ground beneath their feet shifted. Suddenly, they couldn't find the trail, and the forest seemed to confuse them more and more. Branches began to snag at their clothes, as if the forest itself was trying to hold them back. They moved through complete darkness, hearing only rustling and whispers that grew louder and louder, And at some point, when they were on the brink of total exhaustion, the shadows began to move again. The beast was not the only one. All around them, there were more monsters, lurking in the shadows, stretching out from the trees, each step bringing them closer to the group. It was then that they realized they weren't just lost in this forest. The forest was alive, and it wasn't letting go of its victims. When they finally broke free from the forest, they discovered that their tracks had vanished, and the place where they had set up camp was empty. The tents and backpacks were gone, and the only thing left behind were strange marks on the ground, as if something or someone had been watching them later. When rescuers found their belongings, there were no signs of blood, no trace of Josh the killer. Forrest had taken them, and now they were part of that cursed place. And if you listen closely at night, you can hear whispers coming from the shadows. They won't leave until they become part of the forest. Deep in the forests of Maine, in a place where no roads lead, stands an old, dilapidated house. The locals know about it, but no one speaks of it aloud. Even a casual mention makes people avert their eyes and swallow nervously. Legend has it that the house is not empty. No one lives there, but no one ever leaves. Legend has it that the house is not empty. No one lives there, but no one ever leaves. James and Sarah were avid travelers. They loved discovering abandoned places, photographing them, studying their history, and collecting urban legends. They didn't believe in ghosts, curses, or other mysticism. At a roadside cafe, when they heard about the strange house, James just smirked. "It's just another scary story," he said, glancing at the old man behind the counter. The old man shook his head. "People who go in there don't come back, or if they do, they're not the same anymore." "What do you mean?" Sarah frowned. "They're found empty," they breathed. "They walked, but in their eyes there's nothing, as if the house swallowed them from the inside." But the warning only fueled James's curiosity. They had to check the place out. They found it by evening, tall, dark, overgrown with ivy, its windows resembling the empty eye sockets of a skull. It stood among the trees, as if watching them. Perfect spot for a shoot, James said cheerfully, pulling out his camera. Sarah, however, felt uneasy. "Let's at least take a look around first." But James was already stepping onto the porch. The wooden planks groaned under his weight. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, it felt strange. The air smelled of dampness and rot. Yet, there wasn't a speck of dust on the floor. Too clean for an abandoned house, Sarah noted. In the middle of the room stood a set dining table, old porcelain, tarnished silverware on each setting lay a plate, but empty. "Does someone live here?" Sarah whispered. "Or did recently?" James muttered. At that moment they heard footsteps, soft, cautious, somewhere in the hallway. Sarah gripped James's hand. "We need to leave." But then the lights in the house flashed on, and they saw the reflection in the mirror. It was standing right behind them. They rushed to the exit, but the lock clicked shut on its own. The windows vanished into darkness, as if they had never been there. The house began to breathe. Sarah screamed. James lunged for the window, but his hand slipped through the glass as if it were water. The creature took a step forward. "Now, you are part of the house," it whispered. 3 days later, the Rangers found the house. No trace of James or Sarah, only two new silhouettes in the window, standing and watching. If you're ever unlucky enough to find yourself in those woods at night, don't go near that house, because now it's waiting for new guests.